Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Happy Thursday. It's March 18th. I'm Dr. Selma Bartholomew, Dr. B here from Partner with Legacy. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us this evening and today to celebrate Women's Month, to celebrate and recognize and honor the work of our women leaders. You got 1 minute to grab your popcorn. Call any and everybody you know with a heart today. Call them and let them know that we are on and we are talking with a group of dynamic women leaders and talking about their work in community and building strong families, strong children, and doing the work to build the capacity of our community to end violence, to improve on literacy, and to just create spaces where you show up and you feel confident and you know that you belong. So we thank you for joining us. If this is your first time with Partner with Legacy, thank you for making time for us. And if you are returning, thank you for always showing Dr. B and our Partner with Legacy team the love. I have a dynamic panel today. I'm honored to have with us Ms. Shara Giles from the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. And she's going to be talking about their work against violence and anti-violence around women in the Indigenous community, but also giving us a sense as to what's happening, right? Because we know COVID and all of the things that are happening around the world. I also have Dr. Najaya, who is with me and near and dear to my heart and a dear colleague. And we have a leader, Collins, who is joining right now. And she does a phenomenal job with independent schools. And so she is kind of working out her audio. So I will give her a minute to do that. So if you're just joining Dr. B and Partner with Legacy, make sure you hit the like and the subscribe button. And I know you're probably saying, Dr. B, you're always telling me to do that. I don't make up the YouTube algorithms, okay? So be a part of our community, hit the like and the subscribe button. Let me give you a context for today. Certainly it is Women's Month and we're celebrating Women's Month, but I wanted to create a space in this session today to recognize the work and also to really hear the lessons learned and to always create a space for authentic solutions. So we're going to get right into it. And you have one last second to call any and everybody you know with a heart, text them and say, get on Partner with Legacy, get on our YouTube channel so they can join us today. I have the honor and pleasure of, let me first tell everyone the format. So I'm going to introduce each panel member. I'll give them a chance to introduce their dynamic work and their organization and the journey that they've been on as leaders within their community, as also as educators. And I'm going to ask them to, yes, keep their introductions tight, but I also would love it for Women's Month if you maybe tell us maybe one lesson that you've learned from the perspective as a woman leader. So I have the honor and pleasure of introducing Ms. Shara Giles, and she is the board chairwoman for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Society. That's NIWRC. And I said that because you can find them easily online with that acronym. And no stranger to work. So she served 10 years on, now you're gonna help me pronounce it, Muscogee Creek Nation National Council, where she was the youngest female elected to the National Council to date, and the first elected as second speaker. She comes from a background in social work, so she's got a master's in social work from the University of Oklahoma, and is also known as, recognized as an unsung hero from the Mary Kay Foundation for her leadership and advocacy for domestic violence awareness. And so I'm honored to have you with us today, and thank you so much for making time. So I'm going to allow her to introduce herself. Tell us a little bit about the work and the mission of the Indigenous Resource Women's Center, and maybe one lesson learned from the perspective of a woman leader.
Right. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. B, and to be on this panel as well. So my name is Shara Giles. I am a citizen of the Muscogee Creek Nation and of Cherokee descent. Originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma, I now make my home in Northern Virginia. I am the mother of 4 And my work started in advocacy around domestic violence and sexual assault as a survivor of childhood sexual assault and domestic violence. And I just started telling my story and found the strength and the courage. My tribe has a program where I just finally had the courage to go in there one day and said, I don't know what I can do to help, but I want to help. And here's my story. And I also need help. And I'm serving as our tribal council member. So, that's like the Congress for my tribe. We're the fourth largest tribe in the United States with 90,000 citizens. And so they were really surprised and shocked, our program staff, to say, okay, here's someone that's, in the public view, that has this platform that I could use through our tribal council and through the work that I was doing in our communities to really say, okay, we have an issue in our communities that we need to be addressing around domestic violence and sexual assault. So just slowly started getting into the grassroots movement across what we call Indian country and tribal communities, and understanding tribes have unique jurisdictions because we are sovereign governments. We have our own elected leaders. We have our own constitutions. We have our own land base. So the needs are different as people of color. We're sovereign with sovereign nations because we have those trust and treaty relationships with the United States government. So as I moved into my healing journey, I became aware of the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, NIWRC, got involved with the work they were doing, and then was later asked to come on as a board member and was elected as board chair. So NIWRC is really the leader across Indian country. We're going to look at national policy and taking that grassroots voice from our tribal communities and tribal coalitions, saying, okay, this is what's needed in our communities, and understanding there are over almost 600 federally recognized tribes in the United States, and we're all vastly different and unique and have unique needs. So we have to make sure that everyone's represented, and as well as including our women in Alaska and Hawaii, that the Native women there are often excluded. So we want to make sure we're elevating and lifting up their voices.
Thank you so much. Thank you for first educating us and making us so aware. I think that we would like to assume that everyone is the same. Yes, there is this universal presence, but also the fact that there is diversity and that there is differences in needs. Let me introduce our next panel member. I have the pleasure. I'm gonna switch order. I'm gonna do Dr. Najaya next. And no stranger to me, near and dear to my heart, a colleague in this work with schools. And so if you would be so kind, she is absolutely an educator, more than 20 years in educational leadership, and an expert really doing the work around reading and literacy and building a community. So Dr. Najaya, if you would be so kind just to say hello to our audience and talk to us a little bit maybe about one lesson learned from the perspective of women leadership, if you can share that in your introduction.
It's a pleasure to be here today. And Selma, your energy always excites me. I love to be in your presence. And it's so nice to meet the other two members today. I'd like to tell you that I started my career during a very difficult time when crack was prevalent. And I was in a neighborhood where children didn't have the support or the means to learn how to read. And it was then that I knew that this was my heartfelt and this is where I belonged. So I pursued my career in reading. I went back, post-bac, and I became a reading teacher. And the principal of that school used to say to me, you could teach a wall to read. It's just about unlocking the code. And if the children don't know the code and they don't understand what you're saying, underline, circle, the academic vocabulary, they're at a huge deficit. So I just want to go back and just tell you a little bit about me. So I've been in education for over 33 years and more than 20, yes, as a educational leader. And I want to say around 6-7 years, I also have 20 teachers that I supervise, and I am an educational leader in a K-8 school, and I supervise the pre-K to grade 3. And as I said, 20 teachers that I mentor and just love them. They're the greatest group of people that you can imagine. And Dr. Selma has had the pleasure of meeting them as well. Uh, I, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is that I believe that every child can read and should read and should have all of these skills that they need by the time they leave second grade. They should be prepared to read. And what they need are the foundational skills. And when they lack the foundational skills, it just tumbles on top of tumble on top of tumble, and it's very hard for them to catch up. So my life's work is surrounded for that. I want them to read. I know they can read, and I do anything that I can possibly do to get them to read. And the pandemic has really thrown us a curveball. So
we'll go back to the pandemic, and I so appreciate that, right? And so as we look at if we summed up probably the years of experience of all of the dynamic women in this panel, will probably be at least 100 plus doing the work. And that's exactly why we have this panel today, to talk about the work and to talk about, as Dr. Najaya has mentioned in this piece about, okay, if we start off at a lower grade with those gaps, it extends throughout our community. It extends when you can't find jobs. It makes you angry. There's all of these passive violence things that fuels the physical violence. I want to introduce the next panel member on the panel. It's an honor to introduce you to Ms. Gina Parker Collins. And she's in an interesting space around culture and diversity. So she leads an organization called RISE, or I see the website is for RISE. And it really addresses the space for independent schools. So independent schools are private schools, and creating a space for children of color and for diversity within a community and in a space that we're not necessarily always represented. So Gina, if you would be so kind to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your work and also a lesson learned in leadership.
It's a pleasure, first of all, to be here with you women today, you smart women. Thank you, and I appreciate you dealing with my tardiness here. My day has been a little interesting, but again, pleasure to be here. I am a mom as well of 2 independent school scholars. I have been a part of an independent school community for the last 15 years. My eldest is now a sophomore in college, and my youngest is a junior in their independent school. So that journey has always been a very unique space for us, even, around from awareness to access to the application process itself. And it was clear from the beginning that we would be among the numerical minority racially, but it really had everything that we were expecting with regards to education, the resources and the rigor, and opportunities to see the world. However, once I enrolled in the process, it was, oh my gosh, what did we get ourselves into? Because there's going to be some heavy lifting here, socially and emotionally. And I was asked by a head of our lower division to take on a really awesome task, which was to create a Bible to help families of color better navigate and negotiate these spaces, understanding that in these places of power, if you're gonna have to be powerful, right? So here I am 12 years later with RISE, Resources in Independent School Education, which was that next step in creating that Bible. And we focus around diversity, recruitment, but not just for the sake of a transaction, but for building relationships, because again, there's a lot that goes with all of the things that you want as a parent of scholars, but a lot that you have to manage. So we support the recruitment process in culturally relevant ways, as well as the enrollment process in culturally relevant ways. So I'm glad to be here. And one thing that I've learned about being a leader is to practice self-care.
Practice self-care.
That's it's really important. As leaders and communities, we're taking care of a lot of people, and we have to make sure we take care of ourselves first.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
very
you.
true. Yeah.
I want to go back to Shara and the panel. I want to now think about community, because I feel like that is one of the pieces that connects us all in this work. And we're in different spaces, but yet still this idea of community, really matters. So I'd like to ask Shara, can you talk to me a little bit about community within NIWRC, and how do you go about building it and getting individuals to buy into this mission of ending violence against Indigenous women, and creating that space for sovereignty and safeguarding women within the Indigenous community?
Thank you. Great question. It's like I said, it's a unique perspective, since we do have our sovereign governments that we're working with. And NIWRC is a national organization, as I'd mentioned before. So we're across all 50 states, and we work with tribes and tribal coalitions, because some tribes don't have domestic violence or sexual assault programs. So we partner and really build those partnerships in communities, around communities that may not have a tribal specific program, but we also offer cultural competency trainings, resources, and we're really good. I'm really proud of my tribe, the Muskogee Creek Nation. I mean, we do really good to share resources too. We don't have a tribal shelter. So the shelters within our reservation boundaries, we purchase furniture, we'll purchase supplies. We want to make sure we're good partners with everyone that's doing the work. And our work isn't specific just to Indian country as well, and Indigenous women. We're all in this together. And right now it's that time that we have the allies and partners with the Violence Against Women Act. The House just this week passed their House Bill 1620, and it has all the provisions that minority populations were really asking for. And for tribes, it's to being able to prosecute non-Native offenders of domestic violence, and expanding that. So people don't realize, if you come to my reservation, and previously, before VAWA 2013, I could be murdered by a non-Indian, and my tribe can't prosecute, the state can't prosecute, and I will be lucky if the feds pick up the prosecution. So that's been our biggest challenge, is when we look at the work, again, across Indian country, we are constantly having to educate our elected leaders on sovereignty and jurisdictional issues. We are having to constantly educate our community. And even though my tribe is in Oklahoma that has 39 federally recognized tribes in it, the state elected leaders still don't understand what that means. And really the buying power, the dollar power that tribes bring in, the economic development that the tribes bring in to the state, it's a partnership. So for us to do the work at NIWRC, our board members and our staffs, we live in our communities, and we are going out and now we're doing Zoom because of COVID, but we're still meeting, we're still finding ways to reach out. And of course, when you look at domestic violence and sexual assault, it's a scary time, because how are women reaching out? How are they getting services? Our Strong Hearts Native Helpline is the first in all of Indian country, a domestic violence hotline specific to Indian country. And so when looking at resources, if a woman calls up, and like myself, if I'm in Virginia, but my tribe's in Oklahoma, and if I needed help and needed to get back to Oklahoma and I wasn't sure who to call, I could call the Strong Hearts Helpline, and they can connect me with resources, connect me back with my tribe to try to get connected. So we definitely need everybody sharing that message. We need everybody on the same page. And we work really closely with the National Task Force to End Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence. So again, when we say VAWA for all, it's truly that, because we have to look at each unique community that's represented in the Violence Against Women Act, and making sure everybody's needs are met. So that's really important.
And I think what is so interesting is you're making that connection around the role of the economics, and also awareness, and right within communities, that if we're not aware, then our lawmakers and individuals, they get to opt out of policy, they get to opt out of the policies that we need within our communities to create change and to impact families. I'm also, I think as we think about it in the context of community, well, we certainly saw on the news yesterday, this horrific, yet another mass shooting and yet another attack, on women. And I know we see the physical violence, but for me, as we talk today, it's also about passive violence, right? The passive violence is far more and it fuels it. And so when, for example, we have children, like as I mentioned with Dr. Najaya, when we have kids who don't read, when it's passive violence, when you know that someone has had an assault and I choose to ignore the laws and to not, have policy to prosecute. And so as we think about communities across, right, our nation, it's important to think about how we build it. And so I'm going to ask Gina if you would be willing to talk a little bit about the importance of community in your work, and then I'll go to Dr. Najaya.
Yeah, well, I don't think you can survive an independent school as a Black or brown person without community. And we have to.
But is there community for Black and brown children in the independent school? I guess so. Well, make us understand that.
Yeah, well, the school is our community. We're there. So if you are enrolled in an independent school, that is your community. However, when you are in such small numbers, Black and brown students on average, about 6 to 8% in a school, so there are built-in communities within communities that I would really like to touch upon, and those are our affinity groups. So those are safe spaces, a collective of people who share a racial identity or a cultural identity. For example, Parents of Color happens to be the affinity group at my school. And in that community, you find parents, right? You find parents engaging with faculty members and, talking about their children's experiences, not just the challenges, but their cultural identity and the things that are very important that we want to make sure that the school is recognizing and valuing. So there's a lot of voice and visibility and advocacy that actually happens in the affinity spaces. And then, of course, beyond that is the PA and, faculty members and our heads of school. There's 3 stakeholders in our community. There are students, there are faculty members, and there's administrators. And so all 3 of us really need to work together to make sure that all students have a sense of belonging. The organization that I happen to run, it's interesting, I am an independent school parent and I also run an organization that supports that community. And so, we're just making sure that there is voice in community and that we recognize that although we might be in the numeric minority, many of us might even be in a totally different socioeconomic bracket. Independent schools tend to accommodate white and affluent families. I mean, those were the families that they were built for. But it's a new day, and equity and inclusion are huge in our schools. And my job and extending that community even beyond the school itself are the families who are prospective families who are thinking about it, who don't go to my school. And we just encourage and inspire them to, if you can envision it, it is yours, and don't ask to be a part of community. You just join and you bring with you. Yeah, don't ask, show up, speak up, and that community yours.
I think what's awesome about this is because oftentimes when we're in our own space, I'm in the Bronx, or when we're in our own community, we think that we're the only ones dealing with particular issues. So when I heard Shara talk about cultural competence, I hear you didn't necessarily say that word, but I think it's the same thing, right? That you have to have, she's building cultural competence across these 600, right, nations, and you have people to know you and to understand you. And now in the independent space, there is also this need for cultural competence. Dr. Najaya, I'm going to ask you around your work around literacy. Can you talk a little bit about how do you go about kind of thinking about helping parents and community around this gap that we now have around COVID? And I guess that's connected to this cultural competency piece. Is that part of your work? Should we be concerned about it?
Absolutely, we need to be concerned about it. One fantastic thing I think that happened as a result of COVID was that computers went in every child's hand. And to me, this was a dream come true, because there were so many children who didn't have the same opportunities and were not on the same playing field. So now everyone has them, and we make sure that they're fixed and we replace them, and we do what we have to do with that because they need them.
Dr. Najaya does a phenomenal job at her school. So I'm going to say everyone in quotes, okay? Dr. B is going to say that. I could just see the comment box lighting off. So yes, I agree, Dr. Najaya. Yes, the theory that every child should have it. So yes, go ahead.
Did I say something wrong?
No. I'm just pushing back because you said everybody has it, and I think you're right. That vision,
okay.
Yes, well, we want children to have it, but in reality,
I guess I can attest for my school, everyone has it, and then I get the phone call. This is broken. This is happening, but I make sure that we fix it. You know, I just don't sit on it because I know how important this is. So the children that are home, what I didn't mention was I also have, and Dr. B did for me, a great love for ELs, and I have a heart for ELs. And recently I received my doctorate at the age of 60. So I'm very proud of that. And it was under the, and the topic that I studied was about ELs. I saw this coming. I saw the landscape changing in my own school over time. And right now, the school that I am in, we're over 49%, over 50% ELs. And it's like that almost across the whole city right now. But more than that, 62% of them are in the younger grades. So we have to reach out to the parents. The parents didn't know how to connect to the internet. They didn't have internet in many cases. We made sure that happened. It was a lot of trial and error and a lot of work with the community. You talk about building community, Dr. B and ladies. Without the community, the school community, this would not happen. Phone calls, personal visits, Zooms, giving step-by-step directions. The teachers would make slideshows for the parents and walk them through the process, spending endless hours because we care. We have to. Those children are our future. And so not only did we educate the children and get them on computers and devices, but we also educated the parents because the parents were at home watching and listening. And so a lot of those parents who didn't speak English were starting to speak. So it had a kind of ripple effect.
I agree. And I so love that. And I think it was the gift of the pandemic is that absolutely, you're so right that the vision of closing that digital gap and giving all of our children access. But I do know that in reality, it's not every child. And it's
yes, I'm sure. Yes.
It's a huge gap. But I also think as parents, we were so busy. And so, yeah, for the first time, you did get a chance to look in to see what your kids, what your children were doing. I want to go back to you, Shara, if that's okay. You talked about Strong Hearts. So now I should mention, if I'm correct, Strong Hearts is completely volunteer driven, right? So you have thousands of volunteers or hundreds of volunteers that help you with this. And you mentioned a policy around the violence against women. Are there any other policies that you think, as you look at your work with community, knowing the needs of families in need, especially around COVID and the digital divide, what would you want to see by way of policy and change within the work that you're doing?
Okay. Yeah, for clarification, Strong Hearts, it's not a volunteer, it is a hotline. So it's all paid staff and professional level and training. We partnered with the National Domestic Violence Hotline to get that off the ground, and we wanted to move that back into what we call Indian country, to be back in our tribal community. So it is a hotline, and we now just added a text line because of COVID. That was, again, it's how a woman is in the home with her abuser, how does she pick up the phone and call? So the chat line was another feature, a way if someone can get a quick text in that they would have access and connect that way. The funding is always the issue. We, within the Violence Against Women Act, there have been some other acts introduced in the last couple of years, trying to make sure that there's set aside funding specifically for that. So the National Domestic Violence Hotline receives their funding. We're asking for funding directly for the Strong Hearts Helpline. Again, understanding that those jurisdictional needs are very unique to Indian country and tribes and reservations and tribal jurisdictions. So, you know, we work again closely with happening and watching what's happening in DC and saying, understanding what those needs are. And again, for us, it's a treaty responsibility. It's a trust responsibility. Tribes were here long before there was a United States. And that was one way when we look at reparations or any terminology that we want to use. It's like ultimately we're making the federal government accountable for what was promised to tribes. And unfortunately, we know it's that we may not have a lot of documentation, but the documentation that says across our tribes, we didn't have domestic violence. It wasn't a traditional value. It wasn't something, we were very much in balance and in harmony, and that's written. And yet when contact and colonizers came into the communities and saying women are property, women are less than, women really have no say, that was a heart that, you know, that's not our way as Indigenous people. So we feel like those ills, if you will, and those things that came with colonization this is a reflection of that. And Indian country has the highest rates of domestic violence and sexual assault. But we have to remind the federal government, this is something that was created by you, by the federal government, and the lack of respect for women. But the tribal governments, again, are still here. And what is the accountability to the tribes that were either removed or, you know, it was a genocide process, and the history is shown. You know, Hitler watched what the United States was doing to Indian tribes, and he started doing that to the Jewish people. So yeah, it's a constant battle, and we need our allies and our friends. And so, but it's work that we're all committed to.
I love I think the connection, which is what I was really, as we planned this today, I wanted individuals to see the connectivity of the work and to hear that word, right? That people don't honor their promises, and they give a lot of rhetoric. So they'll give rhetoric to, you know, yeah, Dr. B, I'm intentionally not wearing purple on International Women's Month. I don't wear purple. And yes, I encourage my, you know, as I work with my schools, my young girls, yes, do it because it's a symbol, but let me stand there to say that at the end of the day, we're not doing right by, you know, our communities, by our families, by our mothers, and by our children. And so, yeah, give the funding instead of feeding the prison to pipeline and all of those things. I want to ask Gina, if you would talk a little bit about policy as well. Is there something in terms of, I don't think that most people think of, you know, accessibility to independent schools. Certainly the money goes to charter schools. But are there any policies that you see that would be needed in order to move the numbers? You're at 6% in a space that, you know, that has, I noticed that you said we're not designed, but that's okay, right? We're here and we deserve access as well. So what would you see by way of policy that might impact in your work?
Well, you know, the word independent really means independent. So there are no attachments to any federal policies. There are different organizations that, you know, help to network around the financial aid process, which is not merit-based, it's need-based, right? So tuition, you know, can be upwards of over $50,000 a year. And for most people, you know, that's
their year salary.
That's easy for people on Wall Street, right? That's easy for people on Wall Street, but on, you know, regular everyday street, it's not. So I think if you talk about policy, until the independent school changes its business model, it's always going to be cost prohibitive. And we understand the hierarchy and what that system has done systemically around salary. So until that changes, until then, what I definitely do is work to create a mindset shift among folks who are interested in taking a look. I always tell them, don't worry about the money. Don't worry about the money. It sounds counterintuitive. However, you got to get in first, and then you got to ask for what it is you need, you know, and if they present you with a dollar amount and that's not quite your budget, ask for more.
Okay.
The worst they can say is no. So I think, you know, policy-wise, I think it's more around our mindset and showing up, and also holding our schools accountable for attracting, being in community and attracting more Black and brown families, and saying that, you know, our community would not be complete without you, right? That's just not the way the world is. So when you think about policy, we have the National Association of Independent Schools, and they have oversight. Within NAIS, you have People of Color Conference, that's more on the educator and administrative side. Yes. But we also have parent organizations like Resources in Independent School Education, RISE, and getting the word out, being a part of community, making it culturally relevant and responsive, and having accountability around the numbers, making sure our schools, our admissions departments understand that we are expecting them to be in community. And once our families are in our independent schools, that they are taken care of and their needs are being met.
I think what's interesting, especially as I heard Shara's discussion about history, right? We are at a point right now in history where we are recognizing this, this equity, freedom, right, and opportunity. And so I think even in those spaces where people understand, when Dr. Najaya, you said 49% of your school is second language, and I've been in your building. Yes. You have more than 15 languages in your building. So until we kind of realize that, diversity has always been here.
Always.
Always been here. And that, right, we have to now help people to understand that they can't have, completely white executive suite rooms. They can't have leadership where there's no diversity and there's only one person at, on the table. Then those spaces do change, because then the universities, I know we've talked about it, what are you valuing when you admit somebody? How do you show that that person has done work in the community? How do you show that they're doing work, working with organizations, like NIWRC, or doing work around cultural competence? So I want to hear you a second, if you don't mind, Dr. Najaya, if you could talk a little bit about also policy around ELs and policy around getting our children access to reading. And I say that because everyone is saying about COVID and, our children would be 2 years behind. Let me let people know right now, I am a Black woman, and my family went off slave ships and ended up in Grenada, and I got a PhD. So don't tell me nothing about the fact that Black and brown children are going to be left behind 2 years. That's your failure as an adult. So let's not even go there. My children are not behind. Yes, they need help, but can you imagine the teacher going into the building next year and being told, Jason is now 2 years behind? Let's not even have that discussion here with Partner with Legacy. But I know policy matters, right? Reading first teachers matters. So as you think about your work, Dr. Najaya, can you share a little bit about what you think policy needs to be around reading, or around English language learners to help us meet them where they are and to meet their needs?
So I think it goes to the teacher education, especially in terms of ELs, where previously there was a very narrow scope, and it was like, these are EL children, they belong to the EL teacher. No, they are children, and they belong to all teachers. Every teacher is an EL teacher. So I think that the paradigm shift is slowly but surely happening. I know we do a lot of work with ELs, obviously, because that's my thing. And so the students in my school are getting lots of help, but still there's always a huge gap. There's still a huge gap that remains there, and there's so much more work to be done. So I think teacher education and paradigm shift of ownership. Everyone belongs to you. We're here for all, and we need to fix this. And it's working. I see changes. I see positive changes in my world, which may be narrow, but I do in fact see that changes are happening. The other thing I would say is that we need to bring back the money for reading teachers. We used to have reading recovery and reading teachers in every school, and someone thought that wasn't important. Well, if you can't read, you know, you can't do anything else. Okay. You can't read your medicine for your children. You can't order things. You can't survive. Reading is the greatest gift any teacher can give a child, teacher, parent, any community. Without that, we know how people struggle and have to overcome so many other obstacles as a result and take on things that they could have avoided. Meaning, you know, they could have so much of a better job, more opportunity, but because they lack the skills that they need to survive in the world, they have to succumb to something less until they're given more opportunity,
Yes.
or they take it for themselves is what they have to be. I know the community that I work with works very long hours for very little money. They
Mm.
don't have the time to spend with their children, not because they don't want to, they don't have it. If we think about Maslow's law, they're thinking about putting food on the table and keeping everybody safe and at home.
Yes.
During COVID, I worried about this because I know a lot of my family sublet apartments, and there are several families living in the same apartment, and they don't have the school community watching and looking after them as well. So that made it a difficult and scary for me. And, that was something that I worried about because I know that the parents are not always home, that they had to work and they would leave the children. But for good reason.
Yes.
So those policies require money. We required, to have these reading teachers back, better education for our teachers, and a paradigm shift of inclusion. And there's still a huge gap, as we know from the research.
Yeah. It's passive violence. Thank you so much. That was
Yes.
so well
Yes.
said. It's passive violence when we choose to build prisons rather than teach children how to read, and we choose to ignore violence against women, and when we don't even say good morning to our neighbor, it's passive violence. And I'm hopeful, and you're absolutely right about the paradigm shift, and the work that you're doing does make a difference. It absolutely does. For those who are with us, you do get a chance to talk with our panel members. So put your questions in the comments, and a member of my team will absolutely send it to me. If you just joined, thank you. This is our Celebrating Women Leaders, and we're talking to a very dynamic panel of women who are doing just phenomenal work in their community. I'm mindful of the time, and so in terms of questions, but I want to now ask a question around the lessons learned piece around women leadership and this sense of your role in responsibility and service to family and to community. So as you think about your voice as a woman leader, tell me, where did you how did you get that voice or hone that voice? How do you show up? And I ask that because for our audience on this coming Sunday on the Dr. B Show, I'm talking about the imposter syndrome, showing up and you feel fraudulent. But everyone here has shown up and their voice is very clear. So there are times when we may feel that way, but I'd like to ask, where did you get that voice from to be able to walk into that room, Shara? So if you would maybe talk a little bit about that as we think about Women's Month, and for those who are cultivating young women, and of course the lesson also works for our young men. If you would share a piece of that for me, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to clarify, it took me a minute to figure out what L's were, and I'm assuming that means English as a second language.
English, yes. Now they actually have a new name. I should say ENL. It's English as a new language, students.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I apologize.
So I learned something new today.
Clarified that.
Yeah. Good. So it kind of goes back to my question, because it's my response, because as you were talking, it made me think about my own daughter. My oldest daughter has Down syndrome, and today's her birthday, and so it's been a day. We got our COVID shot.
Yes, happy birthday.
Thanks. A little woozy right now. No. So, but it made me think, because I was 16 when I had her, and she was born with Down syndrome. And so as a young mother, my mom and dad, thankfully I came from a family that said, you know what, you're our child, we're going to take care of you, but that's your child, and you're going to take care of her, and we're going to, we're going to surround you, we're going to make sure you're successful. And, just having that family love and support, I was very, very fortunate. And My grandmother herself, my grandfather died early on. I think she was probably in her late 60s. But she never remarried, and she had 10 kids, and doing that, all that work on her own, just that I was raised seeing that. And then as a 16-year-old mom, I just knew I got to make something of myself so I can make a world that's going to accept her and she'll have a place in this world. Because what if she didn't have anybody? What if my parents did throw me out in the street? What if I had to give her up for adoption? Just a lot of these what ifs. And I just very grateful our lives have turned out well in the way we have. But every step I have taken is saying, does she have a place? Does she have a voice? Who's speaking up for her? And who's, just looking out for her and not taking advantage of her? So my lessons have been just watching the women around me in my community and knowing I was loved. And even those just mentors, it wasn't just always family, it was different people that reached out. And even peers, I had peers that looked out and said, Shara, I was 15 when I got pregnant, 16 when I had her, but I was serving on a youth council, and one of the youth members, the president, she said, Shara, you're already a statistic. You're Indigenous, you're Indian, you're in high school. Statistics say you won't finish school, you won't go to college, you'll have another baby before you finish high school. She goes, don't be another statistic. And that's a 16-year-old friend telling me this, and that had the most impact on me. I was like, you're absolutely right. And thank you for loving me and speaking life into me to keep me going and saying, yes, I am a teenage mom now, but I can continue to still do good things and continue to still go on and make a good life for my child. And now I have, like I said, 4 total children. So just that life lesson is just, you never know who you're going to impact and when you're going to impact them. I talk to my kids all the time, but if somebody else says the same thing I've been telling them for 20 years, it's brand new news if somebody cool tells them, or they just hear it differently because they're like, Mom, did you know? And I'm like, yes, I've been telling you that, but just appreciate that. And so just remember that when you think they're not listening or not watching, it may just be that one time, that one memory that says, I really remember that, and that had the most impact on me. So I'm just grateful I had a community and mentors and friends that surrounded me with that. And if it wasn't teachers or if it wasn't school administrators, those people were available as well. I went to the top magnet school in my state, and they didn't look at me and kick me out and say, well, you need to go to the school for pregnant women. You can stay. They encouraged me, like, come back to school. You belong here. And so I finished as student council president and was able to, go on to the university. So I was I always wonder what else was inside of me, because I wanted so much for my kids and for my community to say, that's all I know. All I know is that just those words and those people and that love was around me. So I try to provide that to my kids and my community as well. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing and being so vulnerable with us. I so value
the words matter. People's words matter. Yes. And you have to be very intentional, when you say something, so that you make a difference.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you found those people in your life, as we all have.
Well said. Who wants to share next? Gina Parker Collins from RISE. You want to tell us, how did you hone your voice? How did you find it so you can show up in spaces and places where you may not always be welcomed?
So since we're clarifying a little bit at the top of our third response, so when I said 6 to 8%, I'm talking Black students. Okay. So we also have a grouping under POC, or people of color, and that generally goes anywhere between, around 30 to 50, around 35%. So I just wanted to clarify that. But in either case, not the numerical majority. So I grew up, I'm a baby of the civil rights signing, literally that year when LBJ signed the civil rights into law. I was around, and so I grew up during the Black Power movement as well, right? So I've always had a very keen sense of my cultural capital, who I was. I have, half of my family is from Charleston and the other half is from Antigua, and so we value our cultural capital. We bring it with us. And I was always hungry for more. I ended up going to a predominantly Black college. I went to Howard University. So I was very clear about who I was in this world. And the what my ancestors brought to this world. Like we were capital before there was capital, right? So understanding that, and also wanting to have a really great education and finding an independent school, I knew that my voice was going to be incredibly powerful, and there was no need to play it small just because I found myself in a space that we're first generation independent schools. What is this, right? And this is how the other half is working. And so yeah, I want some of that too. So I really look at it as part of my my reparations, right? And that's how I walk on that campus. That's how I found my voice. So my voice really does come from my ancestors, and my voice comes from an acknowledgement of who I am and what I bring to the table. And I want to share that with as many people as possible. I want them to be inspired and empowered with their cultural identity, right? And understanding that there's value in that, and that they should walk in spaces where they may be, one of a few, saying, yes, please see me. So there's no need to say, well, I don't see color, and I want you to see all of me, because I bring something to the table because of that, right? So that's where I get my voice from.
Well said. I have a couple questions from the audience, so I'm going to ask Dr. Najaya. I'm going to ask you to let me ask you to respond to that question first about your voice, and then I'll share the questions from the audience. Okay? Because someone just
Sure.
a few of them.
So I would say that it takes courage to be uncomfortable. And I have been in many situations where I was totally uncomfortable, but it didn't matter to me because I was going to stand up for what was right and what was just for children. People get used to you. They understand you and they respect you if they think that you know what you're talking about. If they say, she's going to bring something to the table that's going to help me, then now I'm going to listen. So my staff always has this joke. They go, here she comes. They hear me with my heels coming down the hallway. And I will go in, I'll stand, I'll talk to them, I'll sit with the children, I'll teach, I'll co-teach. And I just love it. And they do too. And they're always taking something away from it and said, oh, I learned that. Come back tomorrow. Show me how to do this. And then I have them show each other. So building community and being courageous and not being afraid to say, no, that's, this is not the way, or maybe we could do this another way, or let's help our L's in this manner by giving them the supports and scaffolds that they need. And here's how we do it. So it's not just, it's not the way it is. It's how do we help them? You just can't criticize without, and I mean a positive criticism, without giving someone the support they need to make it better. And that's what I learned.
Oh, well said.
Dr. B?
Well said. For me, I am the youngest of 4 children. And, my parents, I grew up in a 2-parent household. We immigrated here from the Caribbean. And I'm thankful to say that I've always had just a circle of love around me. And I grew up with Jane, my mother, and Paul, my father, who's passed on. And they raised their kids to say, if you're silent, then it means yes. So if I ask you, do you want peanuts, and you're silent, then it means yes. And if you don't want peanuts, well, you better find your voice. You need to learn how to speak up, because then it means that you're okay with whatever it is that someone gives you. And so being able to be in a space where it was okay to speak up, where it was okay to, that culture of, children are meant to be seen and not heard. That was not, the family that we grew up with. We had dinner at the table. We played Monopoly. We, talked to each other. And yes, our parents were certainly hardworking and did the work, but still made time, for family, and made time to talk to us about who we are. And that piece about cultures, we talk about cultural competence. It matters so much also to do the work to know who you are, to do the work to know your history, Yes, read novels, but read nonfiction. And when you do discover something, I read the book, They Came Before Columbus, which was written by Ivan Van Sertima, which talked about, Indigenous Americans, and which talked about the movement of people from Africa throughout the world at a very young age. I read the incidents in the life of a slave girl, Maya Angelou, and everybody, Grapes of Wrath, you name it, just to be able to educate yourself. And I think I learned very easily, when you learn something new, you don't have to beat somebody over the head with it. Right? You take the time to know it and to know yourself, and that makes a difference. That helps to shape and craft your voice. So it matters to have that love and that support to be able to say yes, say no to something, and to know that it's okay. I want to ask from the audience. So I got a couple of text messages around a question, and so I have a question around both L's and cultural competency. So someone asked, have a young teacher who's finding teaching English language learners and students on Zoom a little bit difficult, since they are now all mixed together. So you have students who have different languages all on the same Zoom call. Any suggestions? And I guess I'm going to put that to Dr. Najaya. Any concrete suggestions and that you may offer? And if we can also maybe suggest that they reach out to you after as well. So I don't expect everything, but maybe there's something that may come to mind.
I would definitely love to share. And two things come to mind. One is, when planning where those children go, it's important for the administration to group them accordingly. That definitely helps, because we want that. We want children on the same levels in the same group. Now that we're working on Zoom, the best thing you could do is to go in a breakout room. So you can have some children in the breakout room and have one of them monitor and go back and forth. I know it's difficult, but the breakout room is probably one of the easiest, one of the best solutions. I don't know that it's easy, but it could be one of the best ones.
It's a nice one too. And I think also for that teacher, try not to do large group, do pairs. It's so much easier to get to know somebody who has, we work with an Islamic day school, and they share that they have students that come from, of course, they have kids from Yemen, Egypt. And they have students who, when they come, they don't want to talk. If they have two that came at the same time, they don't want to get to know anybody else.
Yeah.
Yes. How do you get them out of their shell? Well, you pair them instead of trying to just say, go into a group, right? Who wants to do that?
I want to say, do what you think is natural for you. Just think, like, how could I work this out? Should I have them read, talk to each other, read the same book, share information, or I would pick a topic that would be universal for all, that someone could learn about. May I say one other?
So I'm mindful of the time. So
go ahead. So yes, please tell her to reach out to me, and I will share some ideas about videos that they could watch together and then read the same book, the same text.
Excellent. So as we come to the end, I want to invite everyone again, make sure you like and subscribe to our Partner with Legacy channel. I want to just point our audience to a couple of upcoming things before I ask our panel members to just share. The last question is, it takes courage too, and just, as we kind of close off, but I want to invite others to a couple of events that we have. So this coming Sunday on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, we have the Dr. Selma B Show, and my topic is the imposter syndrome, and it's on Manhattan Neighborhood Network at 10 a.m. and you can find that information on our website. And also it's released on our YouTube channel around 10:30 a.m. or 11 a.m. on Sunday. Next Thursday, if you're in a high school or middle school, you don't want to miss our Legacy Ed News. We have New York State Regent Mead, and she is going to be talking about the policies around the test. All of my high school principals, they're so nervous about the high school regents and those assessment things. And so she will be having a very open and authentic conversation around what is happening with COVID and looking ahead around middle and high school. And then the week of April 1st, we have Tracy Hack, and she will be talking about social emotional wellness for our Legacy Ed News. And so doing a piece around mindfulness and wellness for us. And so you can find us usually Thursdays, Legacy Ed News in the morning, 8:50, Legacy webinars, 4 p.m. And a special shout out to all of the Partner with Legacy team, Lena, Kate, Josh, Barbara, everyone for just keeping the work going, even though you see Dr. B most of the time, that I am never alone. And I'm very thankful for that. So if you could just tell the audience, one, where to find you, and also, if you want to share an email, if not, then people have my email, so they can always reach out to me, Dr. Najaya, and I will share that. But tell us your website. I also want everybody to mark down May 5th on their calendar for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. It's the day for violence against Indigenous women. So I'm going to start with you, Sister Shara. If you could just tell us one sentence. It takes the courage to, and well, first, where to find you, and it takes the courage to.
Yes, please look us up at niwrc.org. You have all of our resource information on the website, as well as ways to contact our staff. And I would say it takes courage to admit when you made a mistake.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Lena Collins, tell us where to find you. It takes courage to.
Sure. So it takes, well, I'm going to start off with, it takes courage to tell the truth.
Thank you.
We can be found, we really hang out a lot on Instagram. So the number 4, RIISE, and that's on Instagram and Facebook. And if you added .org onto that, you will get to our website, which is 4rise.org. And we'd love to connect if you're interested in independent school education or you're currently enrolled. And we are actually doing a phenomenal curriculum event on April 10th called Cause No Harm, Curricular Concerns and How to Cure Them. And we have a panel of collaborators that are parents and educators and alum, and we're really thrilled to have Dr. Dan L. Padilla Peralta, who is an associate professor of classics at Princeton. So he's going to talk to us about making sure that our curriculum is culturally relevant and responsive, and how to partner around that, disrupt it when necessary, and to advocate. Thank you.
Excellent. So that's 4R and it's 2ISE. Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Najaya. Thank you. It takes the courage to, and then if you want to.
It takes courage to have difficult conversations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And my contact information is in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Dr. B. Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
That's my ending. It takes courage to follow. Everybody leads, but it also takes courage to follow and to find your voice as you follow. Once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being a part of our Legacy webinar. Please make sure that you like and subscribe the channel. And we're wishing everyone a great day. And thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.